Open the story to chapter 12, please. Okay. I'm thinking that for these classes that I record, I'm going to try and upload them to our HBA Cobble English YouTube channel so that they're more accessible. So I'm going to have one of my students who is a whiz at that do that this week for me so that you guys can have those more available to you. Okay, chapter 12. Look at where we are now. Ramadan came in the fall that year, 1974. For the first time in her life, Miriam saw how the sighting of the new crescent moon could transform an entire city, alter its rhythm and mood. She noticed a drowsy hush overtaking Kabul. Traffic became languid, scant, even quiet. Shops emptied. Restaurants turned off their lights, closed their doors. Miriam saw no smokers on the streets, no cups of tea steaming from window ledges, and at iftar, when the sun dipped in the west and the cannon fired from the Shir Darwaza mountain, the city broke its fast, and so did Miriam, with bread and a date, tasting for the first time in her 15 years the sweetness of sharing in a communal experience. I think Ramadan's coming soon, if I recall. Except for a handful of days, Rashid didn't observe the fast. The few times he did, he came home in a sour mood. Hunger made him curt, irritable, impatient. One night, Miriam was a few minutes late with dinner and he started eating bread with radishes. Even after Miriam put the rice and the lamb and the okra kurma in front of him, he wouldn't touch it. He said nothing and went on chewing the bread, his temples working, the vein on his forehead full and angry. He went on chewing and staring ahead, and when Miriam spoke to him, he looked at her without seeing her face and put another piece of bread into his mouth. Miriam was relieved when Ramadan ended. Back at the Kolba, on the first of 3 days of Eid ul-Fitr celebration that followed Ramadan, Jalil would visit Miriam and Nana. Dressed in a suit and tie, he would come bearing Eid presents. One year, he gave Miriam a wool scarf. The three of them would sit for tea, and then Jalil would excuse himself. Off to celebrate Eid with his real family, Nana would say as he crossed the stream and waved. Mullah Faizullah would come too. He would bring Miriam chocolate candy wrapped in foil, a basketful of dyed boiled eggs, cookies. After he was gone, Miriam would climb one of the willows with her treats. Perched on a high branch, she would eat Mullah Faizullah's chocolates and drop the foil wrappers until they lay scattered about the trunk of the tree like silver blossoms. When the chocolate was gone, she would start in on the cookies. And with a pencil, she would draw faces on the eggs that he had brought her now. But there was little pleasure in this for her. Miriam dreaded Eid, this time of hospitality and ceremony, when families dressed in their best and visited each other. She would imagine the air in her crackling with merriness, the high-spirited, bright-eyed people showering each other with endearments and goodwill. A forlornness would descend on her like a shroud then, and would lift only when Eid had passed. This year, for the first time, Miriam saw her eyes with the eye of childhood imaginings. Rashid and she took to the streets. Miriam had never walked amid such liveliness. Undaunted by the chilly weather, families had flooded the city in their frenetic rounds to visit relatives. On their own street, Miriam saw Fariba and her son Noor, who was dressed in a suit. Fariba, wearing a white scarf, walked beside a small-boned, shy-looking man with eyeglasses. Her older son was there too. Miriam somehow remembered Fariba saying his name, Ahmed, at the tandoor that first time. He had deep-set, brooding eyes, and his face was more thoughtful, more solemn than his younger brother's, a face as suggestive of early maturity as his brother's was of lingering boyishness. Around Ahmed's neck was a glittering Allah pendant. Fariba must have recognized her, walking in burqa beside Rashid. She waved and called out, Eid Mubarak. From inside the burqa, Miriam gave her a ghost of a nod. So you know that woman, the teacher's wife? Rashid said. Miriam said she didn't. Best you stay away. She's a nosy gossiper, that one. And the husband fancies himself as some kind of educated intellectual. But he's a mouse. Look at him. Doesn't he look like a mouse? They went to Sharanu, where kids romped about in new shirts and beaded, brightly colored vests, and compared Eid gifts. Women brandished platters of sweets. Miriam saw festive lanterns hanging from shop windows, heard music blaring from loudspeakers. Strangers called out Eid Mubarak to her as they passed. That night, they went to Shaman, and, standing behind Rashid, Miriam watched fireworks light up the sky in flashes of green, pink, and yellow. She missed sitting with Mullah Faizullah outside the kolba, watching the fireworks explode over Herat in the distance, the sudden bursts of color reflected in her tutor's soft, cataract-riddled eyes. But mostly she missed Nana. Miriam wished her mother were alive to see this, to see her amid all of it, to see at last the contentment and beauty were not unattainable things, even for the likes of them. They had eyed visitors in the house. They were all men, friends of Rashid's. When a knock came, Miriam knew to go upstairs to her room and close the door. She stayed there as the men sipped tea downstairs with Rashid, smoked, chatted. Rashid had told Miriam that she was not to come down until the visitors had left. Miriam didn't mind. In truth, she was flattered. Rashid's sanctity in what they had together, her honor, her namus, was something worth guarding to him. She felt prized by his protectiveness, treasured and significant. On the third and last day of Eid, Rashid went to visit some friends. Miriam, who'd had a queasy stomach all night, boiled some water and made herself a cup of green tea, sprinkled with crushed cardamom. In the living room, she took the aftermath of the previous night's Eid visits, the overturned cups, the half-chewed pumpkin seeds stashed between mattresses, the plates crusted with the outline of last night's meal. Miriam set about cleaning up the mess, marveling at how energetically lazy men could be. She didn't mean to go into Rashid's room, but the cleaning took her from the living room to the stairs and then to the hallway upstairs and to his door. The next thing she knew, she was in his room for the first time, sitting on his bed, feeling like a trespasser. She took in the heavy green drapes, the pair of polished shoes lined up neatly along the wall, the closet door, where the gray paint had chipped and showed the wood underneath. She spotted a pack of cigarettes atop the dresser beside his bed. She put one between her lips and stood before a small oval mirror in the wall. She puffed air into the mirror and made ash-tapping motions. She put it back. She could never manage the seamless grace with which Kabuli women smoked. On her, it looked coarse, ridiculous. Guiltily, she slid open the top drawer of his dresser. She saw the gun first. It was black, with a wooden grip and a short muzzle. Miriam made sure to memorize which way it was facing before she picked it up. She turned it over in her hands. It was much heavier than it looked. The grip felt smooth in her hand and the muzzle was cold. It was disquieting to her that Rashid owned something whose sole purpose was to kill another person. But surely he kept it for their safety, her safety. Beneath the gun were several magazines with curling corners. Miriam opened one. Something inside her dropped. Her mouth gaped of its own will. On every page were women, beautiful women who wore no shirts, no trousers, no socks or underpants. They wore nothing at all. They lay in beds amid tumbled sheets and gazed back at Miriam with half-lidded eyes. In most of the pictures, their legs were apart, and Miriam had a full view of the dark place between. In some, the women were prostrated as if, God forbid this thought, the sujda for prayer. They looked back over their shoulders with a look of bored contempt. Miriam quickly put the magazine back where she'd found it. She felt drugged. Who were these women? How could they allow themselves to be photographed this way? Her stomach revolted with distaste. Was this what he did then, those nights he did not visit her room? Had she been a disappointment to him in this particular regard? And what about all his talk of honor and propriety, his disapproval of the female customers who, after all, were only showing him their feet to get fitted for shoes? A woman's face, he'd said, is her husband's business only. Surely the women in these pages had husbands. Some of them must. At the least, they had brothers. If so, why did Rashid insist that she cover when he thought nothing of looking at the private areas of other men's wives and sisters? Miriam sat on his bed, embarrassed and confused. She cupped her face with her hands and closed her eyes. She breathed and breathed until she felt calmer. Slowly, an explanation presented itself. He was a man, after all, living alone for years when she had moved in. His needs differed from hers. For her, all these months later, their coupling was still an exercise in tolerating pain. His appetite, on the other hand, was fierce, sometimes bordering on the violent. The way he pinned her down, his hard squeezes at her breasts, how furiously his hips worked. He was a man, all those years without a woman. Could she fault him for being the way God had created him? Miriam knew that she could never talk to him about this. It was unmentionable. But was it unforgivable? She only had to think of the other men in her life. Jalil, a husband of 3 and father of 9. A father of 9 at the time, having relations with Nana out of wedlock. Which was worse, Rashid's magazine or what Jalil had done? And what entitled her anyway, a villager, a harami, to pass judgment? Miriam tried the bottom drawer of the dresser. It was there that she found a picture of the boy, Yunus. It was black and white. He looked 4, maybe 5. He was wearing a striped shirt and a bow tie. He was a handsome little boy with a slender nose, brown hair, and dark, slightly sunken eyes. He looked distracted, as though something had caught his eye just as the camera flashed. Beneath that, Miriam found another photo, also black and white, this one slightly more grainy. It was of a seated woman, and behind her, a thinner, younger Rashid with black hair. The woman was beautiful. Not as beautiful as the women in the magazine, perhaps, but beautiful. Certainly more beautiful than her, Miriam. She had a delicate chin and long black hair parted in the center, high cheekbones and a gentle forehead. Miriam pictured her own face, her thin lips and long chin, and felt a flicker of jealousy. She looked at this photo for a long time. There was something vaguely unsettling about the way Rashid seemed to loom over the woman, his hands on her shoulders, his savoring, tight-lipped smile, and her unsmiling, sullen face. The way her body tilted forward subtly, as though she were trying to wriggle free of his hands. Miriam put everything back where she'd found it. Later, as she was doing laundry, she regretted that she had sneaked around in his room. For what? What thing of substance had she learned about him? That he owned a gun, that he was a man with the needs of a man, and she shouldn't have stared at the photo of him and his wife for as long as she had. Her eyes had read meaning into what was the random body posture captured in a single moment of time. What Miriam felt now, as the loaded clothesline bounced heavily before her, was sorrow for Rashid. He too had a hard life, a life marked by lost and sad turns of fate. Her thoughts returned to his boy Yunus, who had once built snowmen in this yard, whose feet had pounded these same stairs. The lake had snatched him from Rashid, swallowed him up, just as the whale had swallowed the boy's namesake prophet in the Quran. It pained Miriam, it pained her considerably, to picture Rashid panic-stricken and helpless, pacing the banks of the lake and pleading with it to spit his son back onto dry land. And she felt, for the first time, a kinship with her husband. She told herself that they would make good companions after all. Right. We're going to go to chapter 13, and it looks like one of the teachers made it. So good morning, evening.
Good evening, Miss Ellen.
Yes.
It's nice to see you. I'm very happy that today I could join your session. It is a great pleasure for me. I'm really happy for this. Yeah.
Good. So we're reading 1,000 Splendid Suns, and we're about to read chapter 13. Do you need me to give you the link to the PDF that the students are using?
Of course. Of course. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right. That'll just take me. Yep. That'll take me a second. I'm going to put it into the Teams chat, which should pop up because you must have gotten into the class on Teams. So it should pop up for you once I have put the link in. Hold on.
Actually, I haven't got up into the Teams because I couldn't find the class there. There was just one team, which SAT teachers. So I joined that one, but I couldn't find our class. Also.
Okay. Well, maybe perhaps at the end of class, you and I can work together to make that better.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, hold link. Well, let's see if this will pop in for you.
I've got a glass of green tea here.
I see that. It's a pretty color.
Yeah. Okay.
I've had 2 cups of coffee.
Okay, great.
No more caffeine for me today.
Okay, that's great.
All right, let's see if I search you. Let's see if that will come through. Okay. I'm gonna have you in here twice. I'm gonna do. I'm going to send the link, and hopefully that will come through for you. See if that something pops in.
Okay, I will see. I will see.
Okay. You're probably. Are you on Signal?
I'm in Signal group, but I think that that is the general group for all the students, not for this grade 11 and 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get you now. Has anything popped?
Okay, here it is.
You got it?
Yeah, here it is.
Okay, good.
I got it.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Have you read this book before?
I have no, not yet.
Oh, good. Okay, well, you're going to have to catch up. You're a little behind.
Okay, I will do my best. I will do my best. But I'm too busy these days.
Yeah, I'm going to give you all the quizzes and everything, you know? Come on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. I will do my best.
No, I'm kidding. Fariba.
I used to be a good student, but I'm not sure nowadays.
I know. Yeah. Well, we spend a lot of time teaching. We don't really feel like being students anymore.
Yes. Yeah. Of course, like making materials for my students, and that is very time consuming for me. Even I work until late at night most of the time. During the day, I'm not. I don't have free time at all.
Yes, I can relate. Fariba, do you have a question?
Yes, teacher, I have a question. Teacher, we know that the Jalil had 3 wives and 11 children, but in here say that a husband of 3, Jalil a husband of 3 and father of 9. So why there is 9?
Because she was thinking about a time prior to the other 2 were born. Well, Miriam was one, but she was remembering a time a longer time ago. So when she said it was, because the narrator says 9 at the time. That's why. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else with any questions? Yeah. Ready to do chapter 13? On the bus ride home from the doctor, the strangest thing was happening to Miriam. Everywhere she looked, she saw bright colors on the drab gray concrete apartments, on the tin-roofed, open-fronted stores, in the muddy water flowing in the gutters. It was as though a rainbow had melted into her eyes. Rashid was drumming his gloved fingers and humming a song. Every time the bus bucked over a pothole and jerked forward, his hand shot protectively over her belly. What about Zalmai? He said. It is a good Pashtun name. What if it's a girl? Miriam said. I think it's a boy. Yes, a boy. A murmur was passing through the bus. Some passengers were pointing at something, and other passengers were leaning across seats to see. Look, said Rashid, tapping a knuckle on the glass. He was smiling. There, see? In the streets, Miriam saw people stopping in their tracks. At traffic lights, faces emerged from the windows of cars, turned upward toward the falling softness. What was it about the season's first snowfall, Miriam wondered, that was so entrancing? Was it the chance to see something as yet unsoiled, untrodden, to catch the fleeting grace of a new season, a lovely beginning, before it was trampled and corrupted? If it's a girl, Rashid said, and it isn't, but if it is a girl, then you can choose whatever name you want. So an interesting point here in San Diego, we don't get snowfall. So we have to go somewhere else to see the first snowfall. Do you ever get, you don't get it where you are now? Yeah. You've never seen, Lucy has never seen snow.
You can say
Get
that's
out!
my dad's fault.
That's your dad's fault.
I was like, I'm not driving straight there. You can drive.
Okay.
All right.
Actually, I'm sorry for hearing that.
Sorry, we told you. Perfect
Yeah,
weather in
okay.
San Diego.
You guys
What do you
are
think?
deprived of seeing snow falling there.
Well,
That is a
what is
great
nice,
blessing.
I'll tell you what is nice here is on
Yeah.
clear winter days, we can see the snow on the mountains in the west.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
No, in the east.
Okay,
See,
that's
my
great.
eastern. Yeah, we can see the snow, so we can stand, and it's. I'm so happy on this one trail. I'm standing at 70 degrees and sunny, but I can see the snow on the mountains, and I think it looks really good way over there.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
Okay, I get distracted. Jeffrey, you still awake over there? Barely. All right. Miriam awoke the next morning to the sound of sawing and hammering. She wrapped a shawl around her and went out into the snow-blown yard. The heavy snowfall of the previous night had stopped. Now only a scattering of light, swirling flakes tickled her cheeks. The air was windless and smelled like burning coal. Cobble was eerily silent, quilted in white, tendrils of smoke snaking up here and there. I really like the way he writes, just it's so poetic. She found Rashid in the tool shed, pounding nails into a plank of wood. When he saw her, he removed a nail from the corner of his mouth. It was going to be a surprise. He'll need a crib. You weren't supposed to see until it was done. Miriam wished he wouldn't do that, hitch his hopes to it being a boy. As happy as she was about this pregnancy, his expectation weighed on her. Yesterday, Rashid had gone out and come home with a suede winter coat for a boy, lined inside with soft sheepskin, the sleeves embroidered with fine red and yellow silk thread. Rashid lifted a long, narrow board. As he began to saw it in half, he said the stairs worried him. Something will have to be done about them later, when he's old enough to climb. The stove worried him too, he said. The knives and forks would have to be stowed somewhere out of reach. You can't be too careful. Boys are reckless creatures. Miriam pulled the shawl around her against the chill. The next morning, Rashid said he wanted to invite his friends for dinner to celebrate. All morning, Miriam cleaned lentils and moistened rice. She sliced eggplants for Borani and cooked leeks and ground beef for Aushak. She swept the floor, beat the curtains, aired the house, despite the snow that had started up again. She arranged mattresses and cushions along the walls of the living room, placed bowls of candy and roasted almonds on the table. She was in her room by early evening before the first of the men arrived. She lay in bed as the hoots and laughter and bantering voices downstairs began to mushroom. She couldn't keep her hands from drifting to her belly. She thought of what was growing there, and happiness rushed in like a gust of wind blowing a door wide open. Her eyes watered. Miriam thought of her 650-kilometer bus trip with Rashid from Herat in the west, near the border with Iran, to Kabul in the east. They had passed small towns and big towns and knots of little villages that kept springing up, one after another. They had gone over mountains and crossed raw-burned deserts from one province to the next. And here she was now, over those boulders and parched hills, with a home of her own, a husband of her own, heading forward one final cherished province. Motherhood. How delectable it was to think of this baby, her baby, their baby. How glorious it was to know that her love for it already dwarfed anything she had ever felt as a human being. To know that there was no need any longer for pebble games. Downstairs, someone was tuning a harmonium, then the clanging of a hammer tuning a tabla. Someone cleared his throat, and then there was whistling and clapping and yipping and singing. Miriam stroked the softness of her belly. No bigger than a fingernail, the doctor had said. I'm going to be a mother, she thought. I'm going to be a mother, she said. Then she was laughing to herself and saying it over and over, relishing the words. When Miriam thought of this baby, her heart swelled inside of her. It swelled and swelled until all the loss, all the grief, all the loneliness and self-abasement of her life washed away. This was why God had brought her here, all the way across the country. She knew this now. She remembered a verse from the Quran that Mullah Faizullah had taught her. And Allah is in the east and the west, therefore wherever you turn there is Allah's purpose. She laid down her prayer rug and said namaz. When she was done, she cupped her hands before her face and asked God not to let all this good fortune slip away from her. It was Rashid's idea to go to the hammam. Miriam had never been to a bathhouse, but he said there was nothing finer than stepping out and taking your first breath of cold air to feel the heat rising on the skin. In the women's hammam, shapes moved about in the steam around Miriam, a glimpse of a hip there, here, the contour of a shoulder there. The squeals of young girls, the grunts of old women, and the trickling of bath water echoed between the walls as backs were scrubbed and hair soaped. Miriam sat in the far corner by herself, working on her heels with a pumice stone, insulated by a wall of steam from the passing shapes. Then there was blood, and she was screaming. The sound of feet now, slapping against the wet cobblestones, faces peering at her through the steam, tongues clucking. Later that night in bed, Fariba told her husband that when she'd heard the cry and rushed over, she'd found Rashid's wife shriveled into a corner, hugging her knees, a pool of blood at her feet. You could hear the poor girl's teeth rattling, Hakim. She was shivering so hard. When Miriam had seen her, Fariba said, she had asked in a high, supplicating voice, it's normal, isn't it? Isn't it normal? Does anybody know what happened?
Yes.
Yes. She lost the baby, yeah. And did you notice it's Fariba, right, that came and saw her? Yeah. Another bus ride with Rashid, snowing again, falling thick this time, was piling in heaps on the sidewalks, on roofs, gathering in patches on the bark of scraggly trees. Miriam watched the merchants plowing snow from their storefronts. A group of boys was chasing a black dog. They waved sportively at the bus. Miriam looked over to Rashid. His eyes were closed. He wasn't humming. Miriam reclined her head and closed her eyes too. She wanted out of her cold socks, out of the damp wool sweater that was prickly against her skin. She wanted away from this bus. At the house, Rashid covered her with a quilt when she lay on the couch, but there was a stiff, perfunctory air about his gesture. What kind of answer is that? He said again. That's what a mullah is supposed to say. You pay a doctor his fee, you want a better answer than God's will. Miriam curled up her knees beneath the quilt and said he ought to get some rest. God's will, he simmered. He sat in his room smoking cigarettes all day. Miriam lay on the couch, hands tucked between her knees, watched the whirlpool of snow twisting and spinning outside the window. She remembered Nana saying once that each snowflake was a sigh heaved by an aggrieved woman somewhere in the world, that all the sighs drifted up the sky, gathered into clouds, then broke into tiny pieces that fell silently on the people below. As a reminder of how women like us suffer, she'd said, how quietly we endure all that falls upon us. Maybe we could read 14. Well, that's sad. Huh? What? You want to read 14? Lucy's into it. Do you want me to keep reading? Should I get a thumbs up and you can do vocab for homework? Okay. I know it's a compelling story, isn't it? Yeah, an alchemist.
Sorry for interruption,
Yes.
Miss.
Yeah.
Laila Azada just texted me that her net is not working, so
Okay.
that's why she couldn't join the class, and she apologized. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's why I record, so there's opportunities for them to watch it at a later
Okay,
time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
yes, you can let her know.
It's so kind of you, Miss. It's so kind of you.
Yeah. So yeah, because only 4 kids have joined. There are some missing. So yeah.
Okay.
I'll send the links.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, you guys ready for chapter 14? Paula likes
Yes.
this book too. Yes, you are. You're
Yeah.
into this book. You've only read 1 chapter with me.
Okay. Okay.
All right. The other thing I'll do is I can send you the vocabulary quiz that they'll be doing just so you can see what I do with that if you want. I can do that at the end of
Okay.
class.
Okay. Okay. I will do that.
Okay. 14. The grief kept surprising Miriam. It took all to unleash it was her. All it took to unleash it was her thinking of the unfinished crib in the tool shed or the suede coat in Rashid's closet. The baby came to life then, and she could hear its hungry grunts, its gurgling and jabbering. She felt it sniffing at her breasts. The grief washed over her, swept her up, tossed her upside down. Miriam was dumbfounded that she could miss in such a crippling manner a being she had never even seen. Then there were days when the dreariness didn't seem quite as unrelenting to Miriam, days when the mere thought of resuming the old patterns of her life did not seem so exhausting, when it did not take enormous efforts of will to get out of bed, to do her prayers, to do the wash, to make meals for Rashid. Miriam dreaded going outside. She was envious, suddenly, of the neighborhood women and their wealth of children. Some had 7 or 8 and didn't understand how fortunate they were, how blessed that the children had flourished in their wombs, lived to squirm in their arms and take the milk from their breasts. Children that had not yet bled away with soapy water and the bodily filth of strangers down some bathhouse drain. Miriam resented them when she overheard them complaining about misbehaving sons and lazy daughters. A voice inside her tried to soothe her with the well-intended but misguided consolation. You'll have others, inshallah. You're young. Surely you'll have many other chances. But Miriam's grief wasn't aimless or unspecific. Miriam grieved for this baby, this particular child who had made her so happy for a while. Some days she believed that the baby had been an undeserved blessing, that she was being punished for what she had done to Nana. Wasn't it true that she might as well have slipped that noose around her mother's neck herself? Treacherous daughters did not deserve to be mothers, and this was just punishment. She had fitful dreams of Nana's jinn sneaking into her room at night, burrowing its claws into her womb and stealing her baby. In these dreams, Nana cackled with delight and vindication. Other days, Miriam was besieged with anger. It was Rashid's fault for his premature celebration, for his foolhardy faith that she was carrying a boy, naming the baby as he had, taking God's will for granted. His fault for making her go to the bathhouse. Something there, the steam, the dirty water, the soap, something there had caused this to happen. No, not Rashid. She was to blame. She became furious with herself for sleeping in the wrong position or eating meals that were too spicy, for not eating enough fruit, for drinking too much tea. It was God's fault for taunting her as he had, for not granting her what he had granted so many other women, for dangling before her tantalizingly what he knew would give her the greatest happiness, and pulling it away. But it did no good, all this fault-laying, all these harangues of accusations bouncing in her head. It was kafir, sacrilege, to think these thoughts. Allah was not spiteful. He was not a petty God. Mullah Faizula's words whispered in her head, blessed is he in whose hand is the kingdom, and he who has power over all things, who created death and life, and he may try you. Ransacked with guilt, Miriam would kneel and pray for forgiveness for these thoughts. Meanwhile, a change had come over Rashid ever since the day of the bathhouse. Most nights when he came home, he hardly talked anymore. He ate, smoked, went to bed, sometimes came back in the middle of the night for a brief and, of late, quite rough session of coupling. He was more apt to sulk these days, to fault her cooking, to complain about clutter around the yard, or point out even minor uncleanliness in the house. Occasionally, he took her around town on Fridays, like he used to, but on the sidewalks, he walked quickly and always a few steps ahead of her, without speaking, unmindful of Miriam, who had almost had to run to keep up with him. He wasn't so ready with a laugh on these outings anymore. He didn't buy her sweets or gifts, didn't stop and name places for her as he used to. Her questions seemed to irritate him. One night, they were sitting in the living room listening to the radio. Winter was passing. The stiff winds that plastered snow onto the face and made the eyes water had calmed. Silvery fluffs of snow were melting off the branches of tall elms and would be replaced in a few weeks with stubby, pale green buds. Rashid was shaking his foot absently at the tabla beat of the Hamahang song, his eyes crinkled against cigarette smoke. Are you angry with me? Miriam asked. Rashid said nothing. The song ended and the news came on. So here is again a tidbit of the historical part, right? The song ended and the news came on. A woman's voice reported that President Daud Khan had sent yet another group of Soviet consultants back to Moscow to the expected displeasure of the Kremlin. I worry that you are angry with me. Rashid sighed. Are you? His eyes shifted to her. Why would I be angry? I don't know, but ever since the baby, is that the kind of man you take me for? After everything I've done for you? No, of course not. Then stop pestering me. I'm sorry, Babakush Rashid, I'm sorry. He crushed out his cigarette and lit another. He turned up the volume on the radio. I've been thinking, though, Miriam said, raising her voice so as to be heard over the music. Rashid sighed again, more irritably this time, turned down the volume once more. He rubbed his forehead wearily. What now? I've been thinking that maybe we should have a proper burial. For the baby, I mean. Just us, a few prayers, nothing more. Miriam had been thinking about this for a while. She didn't want to forget this baby. It didn't seem right not to mark this loss in some way that was permanent. What for? It's idiotic. It would make me feel better, I think. Then you do it, he said sharply. I've already buried one son. I won't bury another. Now, if you don't mind, I'm trying to listen. He turned up the volume again, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes. One sunny morning that week, Miriam picked a spot in the yard and dug a hole. In the name of Allah, and with Allah, and in the name of the messenger of Allah, upon whom be the blessings and peace of Allah, she said under her breath as her shovel bit into the ground. She placed the suede coat that Rashid had bought for the baby in the hole and shoveled dirt over it. You make the night to pass into the day, and you make the day pass into the night, and you bring forth the living from the dead, and you bring forth the dead from the living, and you give sustenance to whom you please without measure. She patted the dirt with the back of the shovel. She squatted by the mound. She closed her eyes. Give sustenance, Allah. Give sustenance to me. All right, last one, because then we finish part one, actually. Yeah. I keep looking at that clock, which is woefully wrong. Okay. So notice that the title of this chapter is the date. Okay. So remember that was back in 1974, and now we're in April 1978. All right. So you have to pay attention to that because we've jumped several years. So there's going to be quite a bit. There's Fariba's pretty face. We are going to get more of the political makeup of what's happening in Kabul here too, okay? April 1978. On April 17th, 1978, the year Miriam turned 19, all right? How old was she when she went to Kabul? 15, yeah, when she got married, she was 15. Yep. A man named Mir Akbar Khyber was found murdered. 2 days later, there was a large demonstration in Kabul. Everyone in the neighborhood was in the streets talking about it. Through the window, Miriam saw neighbors milling about, chatting excitingly, transistor radios pressed to their ears. She saw Fariba leaning against the wall of her house, talking with a woman who was new to Damazang. Fariba was smiling, and her palms were pressed against the swell of her pregnant belly. The other woman, whose name escaped Miriam, looked older than Fariba, and her hair had an odd purple tint to it. She was holding a little boy's hand. Miriam knew the boy's name was Tariq because she had heard this woman on the street call after him by that name. Okay, so this is another key character in this story. And could somebody in Kabul tell me how to pronounce it? Is it Tariq? 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 Tariq. Okay, I'm going to do this right.
Tariq.
Tariq. Oh, Tariq. Okay. I'm sure I'll just mess it up all over. Okay. So Tariq is also a key character. All right. And notice that Fariba is pregnant, right? That's the woman in the neighborhood who's married to the teacher. Okay. And she's pregnant, and that pregnancy will make a difference for us. All right. Let's see. Miriam knew the boy's name was Tariq because she had heard this woman call on the street call after him by that name. Miriam and Rashid didn't join the neighbors. They listened on the radio as some 10,000 people poured into the streets and marched up and down Kabul's government district. Rashid said that Mir Akbar Khyber had been a prominent communist and that his supporters were blaming the murder on President Daud Khan's government. He didn't look at her when he said this. These days, he never did anymore, and Miriam wasn't even sure if she was being spoken to. What's a communist? She asked. Hey, Jeffrey, stay with me. What's a communist? She asked. Rashid snorted and raised both eyebrows. You don't know what a communist is? Such a simple thing. Everyone knows. It's common knowledge. You don't. Bah. I don't know why I'm surprised. Then he crossed his ankles on the table and mumbled that it was someone who believed in Karl Marxist. Who's Karl Marxist? Which isn't quite right, Karl Marx. Rashid sighed. On the radio, a woman's voice was saying that Taraki, the leader of the Kalk branch of the PDPA, the Afghan Communist Party, was in the streets giving rousing speeches to demonstrators. What I mean was, what do they want? Miriam asked, these communists. What is it that they believe? Rashid chortled and shook his head, but Miriam thought she saw uncertainty in the way he crossed his arms, the way his eyes shifted. You know nothing, do you? You're like a child. Your brain is empty. There is no information in it. I asked because... Shupko, shut up. Miriam did. It wasn't easy tolerating him talking to her this way, to bear his scorn, his ridicule, his insults, his walking past her like she was nothing but a house cat. But after 4 years of marriage, Miriam saw clearly how much a woman could tolerate when she was afraid. And Miriam was afraid. She lived in fear of his shifting moods, his volatile temperament, his insistence on steering even mundane exchanges down a confrontational path that, on occasion, he would resolve with punches, slaps, kicks, and sometimes try to make amends for with polluted apologies, and sometimes not. In the 4 years since the day at the bathhouse, there had been 6 more cycles of hopes, raised then dashed. Each loss, each collapse, each trip to the doctor more crushing for Miriam than the last. With each disappointment, Rashid had grown more remote and resentful. Now nothing she did pleased him. She cleaned the house, made sure he always had a supply of clean shirts, cooked him his favorite dishes. Once, disastrously, she even bought makeup and put it on for him, but when he came home, he took one look at her and winced with such distaste that she rushed to the bathroom and washed it all off, tears of shame mixing with soapy water, rouge, and mascara. Now Miriam dreaded the sound of him coming home in the evening, key rattling, the creak of the door. These were sounds that set her heart racing. From her bed, she listened to the click-clack of his heels, to the muffled shuffling of his feet after he'd shed his shoes. With her ears, she took inventory of his doings, chair legs dragged across the floor, the plaintive squeak of the cane seat when he sat, the clinking of spoon against plate, and the flutter of newspaper pages flipped, the slurping of water. And as her heart pounded, her mind wondered what excuse he would use that night to pounce on her. There was always something, some minor thing that would infuriate him, because no matter what she did to please him, no matter how thoroughly she submitted to his wants and demands, it wasn't enough. She could not give him his son back. In this most essential way, she had failed him. 7 times she had failed him, and now she was nothing but a burden to him. She could see it in the way he looked at her, when he looked at her. She was a burden to him. What's going to happen? She asked him now. Rashid shot her a sidelong glance. He made a sound between a sigh and a groan, dropped his legs from the table, and turned off the radio. He took it upstairs to his room. He closed the door. On April 27th, 10 days later, Miriam's question was answered with crackling sounds and intense sudden roars. She ran barefoot down to the living room and found Rashid already by the window, in his undershirt, his hair disheveled, palms pressed to the glass. Miriam made her way to the window next to him. Overhead, he could see military planes zooming past, heading north and east. Their deafening shrieks hurt her ears. In the distance, loud booms resonated, and sudden plumes of smoke rose to the sky. What's going on, Rashid? She said. What is all this? God knows, he muttered. He tried the radio and got only static. What do we do? Patiently, Rashid said. We wait. Later in the day, Rashid was still trying the radio as Miriam made rice with spinach sauce in the kitchen. Miriam remembered a time when she had enjoyed, even looked forward to cooking for Rashid. Now cooking was an exercise in heightened anxiety. The kormas were always too salty or too bland for his taste. The rice was judged either too greasy or too dry. The bread declared too doughy or too crispy. Rashid's fault-finding left her stricken in the kitchen with self-doubt. When she brought him his plate, the national anthem was playing on the radio. I made sabzi, she said. Put it down and be quiet. After the music faded, a man's voice came on the radio. He announced himself as Air Force Colonel Abdul Qadar. He reported that earlier in the day, the rebel 4th Armored Division had seized the airport and key intersections in the city. Kabul Radio, the Ministries of Communication in the Interior, and the Foreign Ministry building had also been captured. Kabul was in the hands of the people now, he said proudly. Rebel MiGs, which are airplanes, had attacked the presidential palace. Tanks had broken into the premises, and a fierce battle was underway there. Dowd's loyalist forces were all but defeated, Abdul Qadar said in a reassuring tone. Days later, when the communists began the summary executions of those connected with Daud Khan's regime, when rumors began floating around Kabul of eyes gouged and genitals electrocuted in the Poli-Sharki prison, Miriam could hear the slaughter that had taken place in the presidential palace. Daud Khan had been killed, but not before the communist rebels had killed some 20 members of his family, including women and grandchildren. There would be rumors that he had taken his own life, that he'd been gunned down in the heat of battle, rumors that he'd been saved for last, made to watch the massacre of his family, then shot. Rashid turned up the volume and leaned in closer. A revolutionary council of the armed forces has been established, and our Watan will now be known as the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, Abdul Qadar said. The era of aristocracy, nepotism, and inequality is over, fellow Hamwatans. He had ended decades of tyranny. Power is now in the hands of the masses and freedom-loving people. A glorious new era in the history of our country is afoot. A new Afghanistan is born. We assure you that you have nothing to fear, fellow Afghans. The new regime will maintain the utmost respect for principles, both Islamic and democratic. This is a time of rejoicing and celebration. Rashid turned off the radio. So is this good or bad? Miriam asked. Bad for the rich, by the sound of it, Rashid said. Maybe not so bad for us. Miriam's thoughts drifted to Jalil. She wondered if the communists would go after him then. Would they jail him, jail his sons, take his businesses and properties from him? Is this warm? Rashid said, eyeing the rice. I just served it from the pot. He grunted and told her to hand him a plate. Down in the street, as the night lit up in the sudden flashes of red and yellow, an exhausted Fariba had propped herself up on her elbows. Her hair was matted with sweat, and droplets of moisture teetered on the edge of her upper lip. At her bedside, the elderly midwife, Wajma, watched as Fariba's husband and sons passed around the infant. They were marveling at the baby's light hair, at her pink cheeks and puckered rosebud lips, at the slits of jade green eyes moving behind her puffy lids. They smiled at each other when they heard her voice for the first time, a cry that started like the mewl of a cat and exploded into a healthy, full-throated yowl. Noor said her eyes were like gemstones. Ahmed, who was the most religious member of the family, sang the azan in his baby sister's ear and blew in her face 3 times. Layla it is, then? Hakim asked, bouncing his daughter. Layla it is, Fariba said, smiling tiredly. Night beauty. It's perfect. So note the fact that Layla is born. And what color is her hair? Light. Yep. And her eyes are green. My color eyes, by the way, just saying. Rashid made a ball of rice with his fingers, put it in his mouth, chewed once, then twice before grimacing and spitting it out on the sofra. What's the matter? Miriam asked, hating the apologetic tone of her voice. She could feel her pulse quickening, her skin shrinking. What's the matter? He mewled, mimicking her. What's the matter that you've done it again? But I've boiled it 5 minutes more than usual. That's a bold lie. I swear. He took the rice angrily from his fingers and pushed the plate away, spilling sauce and rice on the sofra. Miriam watched as he stormed out of the living room, then out of the house, slamming the door on his way out. Miriam kneeled to the ground and picked up the grains of rice, then put them back on the plate. But her hands were shaking badly, and she had to wait for them to stop. Dread pressed down on her chest. She tried taking a few deep breaths. She caught her pale reflection in the darkened living room window and looked away. Then she heard the front door opening, and Rashid was back in the living room. Get up, he said. Come here, get up. He snatched her hand, opened it, and dropped a handful of pebbles into it. Put these in your mouth. What? Put these in your mouth. Stop it, Rashid. His powerful hands clasped her jaw. He shoved 2 fingers into her mouth and pried it open, then forced the cold, hard pebbles into it. Miriam struggled against him, mumbling, but he kept pushing the pebbles in, his upper lip curled in a sneer. Now chew, he said. Through the mouthful of grit and pebbles, Miriam mumbled a plea. Tears were leaking out of the corners of her eyes. Chew, he bellowed. A gust of his smoky breath slammed against her face. Miriam chewed. Something in the back of her mouth cracked. Good, Rashid said, his cheeks were quivering. Now you know what your rice tastes like. Now you know what you've given me in this marriage, bad food and nothing else. Then he was gone, leaving Miriam to spit out pebbles, blood, and the fragments of 2 broken molars. Rashid, he's my favorite mean guy. You know, he's the man I love to hate. And then one of the things I like about that is that the writing is so beautiful in this book that I really do hate him. You know, I mean, it sucks me right in this book, doesn't it? Yeah. Lucy hates Rashid now too. All right. Any questions, comments? Yeah, Paula has a question. Paula. What are molars? That's your back teeth. Yeah. The teeth that chew things. So now she's got 2 broken ones. Yeah, and I would imagine that at that point dental care wasn't great. So if she was even allowed to get it. So yeah. Yeah, it would be painful and yes, unpleasant for the future. Yeah, for chewing the front bites. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? No.
Okay, teacher.
Yeah.
The picture that you put for us, we should do it for our homework.
Yes. So do your vocabulary quiz for your homework, and if you can, create a document in your folder in Word so that I can see it more easily. If that's a problem, just send me your response in the Teams chat where I put the words. Okay.
Okay, teacher. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Yes, I'm going to stop the recording. Yeah, you can put it there. I'm going to stop the recording and then let's see, Mr. Habibi, why don't we, I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can kind of see how it's set up, and that might